For a long time, I thought, yeah, it'll be fine. One cut of plywood here, a quick sand of some MDF there. You tell yourself, it doesn't matter. But those cuts add up fast. And eventually, you realize something slightly worrying. You've probably been breathing in a lot more dust than you should have been. And these microscopic dust particles aren't exactly good for you. And the more things I build in this workshop, the worse the problem gets. It's been 3 years since I built this workshop, but dust extraction is one of those things that's never been a top priority. It's kind of like filling out your taxes or getting that lump check. It never gets to the top of the list. And for the past 3 years, my dust extraction has consisted of a mask, a brush, and a vacuum cleaner from Aldi, which is the woodworking equivalent of fighting a house fire with a watering can. Meanwhile, on YouTube, everyone seems to have the most incredible dust extraction systems which cost more than my entire shop. I can't afford that, so instead, I'm going to build my own, using drain pipe, a 3D printer, and whatever bargains I can pick up on eBay. So I'm going to take a 4-stage approach to solving this problem. Stage 1 is a chip extractor, and that will handle the planer, the bandsaw, the table saw, and the lathe. Stage 2 is a shop vac, and that will handle the workbench, the miter saw, a sander, and also the router table. Stage 3 is an air filter, and stage 4 is a dust mask. This shop is tiny. It's around 2.4 meters wide by around 5 meters long, and that just means I don't have the space for a freestanding extractor. So instead, I opted for a wall-mounted one from Axminster, and big shout out to Father Christmas who made this happen. However, after doing some research, I found out that the bag that comes with the extractor is only rated to 30 microns, and that's just not going to be good enough for me. I want one with a canister filter and a Cyclone, like you see in all these expensive shops. And that's going to mean that I need to get creative with the design and how I fit this all into the tiny space. So this whole project started with hours and hours of CAD work in Fusion, followed by even more countless hours just letting the 3D printer run. And I think I must have got through around 4 to 5 kilos of filament just in this project. And important to note that everything is custom. Some of the parts are really simple, but some of them are much more complex. And it's all been bespoke design to fit into a really small space. And that space is ultimately the challenge here. I've got roughly 40 centimeters of depth by about 1 meter of width to work with. And that has to fit in the air filter, the extractor, the Cyclone, and all of the mounts. So to do all this, I originally did think about 3D printing something that would have been an absolute nightmare to construct. It would have used way too much filament and it wouldn't have been able to fit on the bed of my printer. So instead, I decided to build a mount out of plywood. So the bandsaw cuts were less than perfect. It definitely needs some tuning up. But after some refining on the sander, I started to glue it all together, again using the pastry brush. So shout out to whoever recommended that in my first video. After adding a few brad nails to secure everything together, I could then leave it to glue up overnight. Now you'll see that it's a slightly misshapen here, so after some refinement with a rasp and also a plane, I did a test fit with a 1 micron filter. And this filter was actually from Axminster and I purchased it due to its size, but it was actually on sale, so it only cost around £80, which is great for one of these 1 micron filters. You'll also notice throughout the build from this point on that there's a CNC machine suspended from the ceiling on a series of pulleys. It's awkward, it's constantly in the way, and it made this build massively complicated, but it's the only space that I've got to fit it in. To mount everything, I tried to use a French cleat system, having had some success on my tool wall. It keeps things simple, it's strong, and I can always move it or remove it if I need to. For the filter base, I used a 9-litre Tupperware, and this is actually one that I had lying around that used to store cat food, but hopefully this should enable me to keep a track on how much dust is getting through. To connect the filter to the extractor, I had to design and print some custom mounts. And the angles here were really awkward, so it took quite a bit of finessing in CAD to get everything lined up properly. Before mounting it, I added a quick bead of silicone just to make sure that everything was airtight, before moving on to modifying the extractor. And one issue that I ran into pretty quickly was that the on-off switch was really hard to access, so I decided to make it a smart extractor. To do this, I took apart the MBR switch and put some jumper cables across the live and the neutral. I just used automotive plugs here that I had from my motorbike, and that everything connected together really well. After that, I added a Tapo smart plug and linked it to the Alexa in my shop. So now I can control it with my phone or just by asking. Alexa, turn on the dust extractor. This is a massive quality of life improvement in a tiny space like this and means that I'm not constantly skirting around the table trying to get to the extractor. Mounting the extractor to the wall was not fun. It is so heavy, so I ended up fixing a shelf bracket just to hold it in place while I could put in the initial screws to hold it up. It was then a case of connecting everything together, and I had to print a few more custom angled parts and use some flexi hose and some Jubilee clips to make it all work, because the space here is ridiculously tight. There's around 20 centimetres between the units, so fitting everything in was one of the hardest parts of the build, but it was then on to the Cyclone. So I looked at a number of different options for the Cyclone, for the dust extractor system, and I looked at the Dust Deputy XL, which is so expensive in the UK, and I decided it wasn't out of my budget. And then I also looked at the Axman's version, which is simply too big for my workshop. So instead what I decided to do was 3D print them, and due to the size that the Cyclone would need to be, I've had to do this in 9 different parts, which I'm then going to glue all together. And fingers crossed, if my CAD is good enough, it should bespoke fit the space. I tested a few different glues in the assembly process, and surprisingly, super glue worked the best. The whole thing was pretty fiddly to put together, with lots of small tabs, and in hindsight, I probably should have made them bigger and it would have made my life much easier at this stage. But with a lot of patience and a lot of fixing spray, it all started to look vaguely like a Cyclone. This is actually the largest thing I've ever 3D printed by a long way, so it was a bit of an experiment, but really satisfying to see it all come together. If you would like to try and print this or anything else that I've designed, it's all available for free in the description. Once it was assembled, I went back over every single joint on the Cyclone and just loaded it with super glue to reinforce it and remove any air gaps. Not the cleanest process, but it did make it really solid. I could then move on to building a custom bin for the Cyclone to sit on, and I've seen a lot of people online use plastic or metal drums, but I just don't have the space, so I made something bespoke out of some MDF offcuts that will just slide in next to my planer thicknesser. I also designed it so it would take a 120 litre wheelie bin bag, which should make removing any of the waste really simple. I then added some wheels to the base, and this will hopefully just help me take the bag in and out and make it sure it can slide into the space as easily as possible. I then made a tight-fitting lid to keep it relatively airtight, and I might come back here and add some foam later, but for now it does the job and I'll see how it goes with testing. After locating the correct spot for the Cyclone, I could cut a hole for the dust to fall through. I could then add some sanitary sealant to keep it airtight and test fit the Cyclone with the extractor. Now you'll see here that I've left the hose slightly longer than required, and that's so I can remove the top of the bin, but I might shorten this after testing to improve airflow. It was then time to add the ducting, and I decided to use 68mm drain pipe for this and 3D printed a set of custom blast gates. The pipe itself I actually managed to pick up on Facebook Marketplace for free a couple of years ago, and it's just been sat outside ever since, but I had just about enough to do the whole workshop. The first thing I connected was the lathe, and I'd made a custom funnel to catch the chips and mounted it using an old photography boom arm, which is actually broken and doesn't take any weight, but for this it should do the job. I then ran ducting across the ceiling and mounting everything as I went. One tip if you are going to do this is try wrapping each connection with a bit of electrical tape, as it makes everything much snugger and helps to reduce any air leaks. But from there I connected the table saw, and you can kind of already see the problem I was having with dust everywhere on the floor. All of the mounts here are custom printed and a friction fit, and I was just trying to minimise air loss as much as possible, but also make it easy to assemble. I'm not going to show every single connection here because it gets repetitive, but there are a total of 4 blast gates, and due to the size of the shop, the pipe runs are kept to an absolute minimum. After connecting the bandsaw, I connected the planer thicknesser, and this is one that was actually left in a garage that I was renting. It's a bit rusty, but it does work well. It just didn't have any dust extraction. So again, I printed a custom mount. This just mounts on with a single wing nut. And after hooking up the Cyclone, it was time to test it. Alexa, turn on the dust extractor. And you can see the Cyclone here with a light behind it, and you can actually see the dust moving through the system. And at the extractor, I'm getting around 20 meters per second of airflow, peaking at around 21. And by the end of the run at the lathe, it drops to around 14, so there's definitely room for improvement. But in use, it's a massive improvement on what I previously had. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than before. On the planer thicknesser, I'm averaging around 17 meters a second, and you can see the chips getting sucked up there. Again, not perfect, but way better than before. And on the bandsaw, I'm having around 13 meters a second, which is the lowest reading I got, but for the bandsaw, it seems to work fine. And when you take a step back and look at it, this entire system fits into a space about 1 meter by 40 centimeters, which is kind of ridiculous. It is a little bit awkward and it is unconventional, but throughout my testing, it seems to really work. Stage 2 is the shop vac system, and this one I actually picked up at a cart boot sale for £40. It was sold as spares or repair, but it turned out it just had a clogged hose, so I got a really good deal. This then runs into a more conventional Cyclone into a metal bucket with some space underneath for bags and a brush. I kept the pipe runs deliberately short here, and all of them are actually from recycled vacuum cleaners. So one of the biggest headaches that I had to come across was how the shop vac could simultaneously be used on 5 separate tools. And what I was really bored of doing was moving the shop vac, disconnecting hoses. It just never happened because I was being lazy. So I've come up with this, which is effectively a sliding dust port. There's 5 different holes here, and each one will be individually plumbed in. This will then go to the Cyclone, and I'll then just be able to drag it across, select the appropriate hole for the appropriate tool, and it'll mean that rather than changing hoses or moving the vacuum every time I want to use a tool, all I have to do is slide it along to the next setting, and it should already be all plumbed in. You'll see that I did start trying to apply magnets to the end, and there's magnets in the front face as well, but I actually found that this doesn't really add any value, and it's such a tight friction fit due to the way it's been designed, that it doesn't really do anything. So that might change with time, but in the short term, I'm going to try it without and see how it goes. Plumbing all this in was actually a lot harder than I expected, and it's something I can definitely improve on. So I'm going to test it for a bit and then develop and iterate it. All the joints to the tools are taped to keep things airtight, and I've run a 40mm waste pipe beneath the bench using some dead space. From there, I connected it to the pillar drill, the miter saw, the sander, and the planer thicknesser, all with custom printed mounts. So this part I'm particularly happy with, and it's effectively a modular bench connection that means I can feed the sander, the table saw, or any other dust hose. Underneath, it's really not that pretty, but now I can just pick up a tool and it turns on automatically, and I've got extraction pretty much exactly where I need it. I also tested a simple boom arm setup using some custom clips. I've seen so many of these on YouTube, and I thought I'd give it a go myself. But it quickly allows me to move the hose between the table saw and also the bench. And for something this simple, it actually worked really well, and again, I'm going to continue using it. All the tools are connected to the shop vac via an extension lead, which means that as soon as I power on a tool, the automatic switch is triggered and I get both extraction and power simultaneously. There's been a real improvement in extraction across all of the tools connected to the shop vac, but particularly the miter saw and also the router table. Stage 3 is an air filter, and normally you'd mount this to the ceiling, but again there's no space because of the CNC. So instead I built a custom shelf and mounted it using some old brackets. And finally, stage 4, and I've gone for a tiered setup. I've got a normal mask, I've got a powered mask for use on the lathe, and that has eye protection, and if it gets really bad, I've got my apocalyptic option. So it seems to be an ongoing theme with my videos, but the main lesson for me this month was time appreciation. I hadn't quite anticipated how much time it would take to design everything on CAD, to 3D print everything, to refine those designs. And I originally picked this project because I had a really busy and hectic personal schedule this month, and I couldn't dedicate hours and hours and hours to creating something out of wood. But the reality was, I spent all that time in front of a computer screen and iterating on 3D prints. And whilst I really enjoyed it, I'd have much preferred to be out here cutting some wood. So I think lesson learned from me that 3D printing isn't always the time saver that it's made out to be on YouTube. So if you've made it this far, please drop a comment below. What did I get wrong? I know dust extraction is such a contentious topic on YouTube, and I've probably done something wrong. So please let me know what that is and I'll try and fix it. But also, if you have enjoyed this video, please drop a like and a subscribe. It is such a motivating factor for me to make these videos, getting up early before work, staying up late after work, and just trying to create something that I've enjoyed making, but also that you've enjoyed watching. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.